So from an agenda point of view, we thought it would be appropriate to follow the president of one of the world's largest corporate foundations with the CEO of one of the world's largest community foundations. That's Dr. Emmett Carson. Emmett is the founding CEO of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and he's, of course, consistently recognized as one of the biggest and most influential nonprofit leaders in this space, and it's a big honor for us to have him here. Silicon Valley Community Foundation has $4.7 billion under management, and Emmett oversees the Community Foundation's work with donors and with corporations, and he'll be talking about those relationships a little bit in his remarks. Before this, Emmett's career was as CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, and before that at the Ford Foundation. Now, leading this conversation with Emmett will be Stacy Palmer, and this conversation is going to include your audience questions, so start thinking of those now. Stacy's immense contribution to the independent sector is no doubt well known to everyone here. She's been with us before, and we're thrilled that she's back to help us with this session. Stacy is the editor of the Chronicle of Philanthropy, which is, of course, considered the #1 news source in the nonprofit world. She's been the top editor there since the newspaper was founded in 1988. Because of that, no doubt, she's frequently on radio and television to offer her commentary on the nonprofit world. And for the next half an hour, 45 minutes, they're going to discuss a range of issues that we think are material to corporate grant makers: strategy setting, balancing local and global, employee engagement. One of the reasons why it was so important for us to have Dr. Carson here today is this is the 100th anniversary of Community Foundations. So what better year to have Emmett here to share his thoughts with us on where community foundations have been and where they're going from his pretty unique seat as a leader. So I'd like to invite you both up to the stage now. Thank you.
Thank you all, and good morning. I'm delighted to have a chance to talk to Emmett publicly, because privately he's one of the most delightful people to talk to in the world and one of the most provocative, and I'm sure you'll find that here. I will be clear that I'm not taking notes, so be as provocative as you want to be.
All right.
And say what needs to be said. One of the things that Margaret noted, of course, is that we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of community foundations. And I would say ever since we started the Chronicle, we've been talking about the death of community foundations and worrying about whether they were really going to survive. And I think that's true of many organizations that were created 100 years ago. How do they stay relevant? I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the community foundations writ large, and we'll get to Silicon Valley shortly, but for the people in this room, what's important about how community foundations are reinventing themselves, and what is it that corporations in particular can do to help make sure that the reinvention happens in a positive way for society?
Well, thank you. Good morning. I'm still on California time, so when I say good morning, I really do mean good morning. You know, nothing stays the same for 100 years. And so community foundations across the country find themselves at a period of evolution. And so we're experimenting. And we're experimenting in a lot of different ways. The basic model, for those of you who may not be familiar with community foundations, think of us as a charitable bank. Individuals, corporations create charitable funds. For individuals, they get a tax deduction at the point of which they create the fund. The monies are then commingled for investment purposes, and people make recommendations to nonprofits, typically in their local community, but that's changing, and we're a model of how that's changed radically. And they make grants out. And that's really the business model. That business model is not sustainable because the fees don't generate enough to underwrite the operations. And that's led community foundations to experiment with other models. They are your best bet in most cases for your local work and local partners. Some can do more than just the local work, but your community foundation is a place to get on the ground information. It's a place to partner with how to meet what you believe are your local responsibilities. They are probably the ones to create the networks and the coalitions, and the very best ones can help you do work outside of the local community.
Let's talk about what that means when you talk about community and you talk about local, because you are both the biggest grant maker locally and internationally, and you manage to balance both those things in part because that's the demands of your donors. But how are you defining community, thinking about that, and can you talk a little bit about how the transformation of the fund has grown to be a more global player as well as a local player?
Yeah, so community is an elastic term, right? So I'm part of the male community. I'm part of the African American community. I'm part of my church community. I've lived in several places, New York, Minneapolis, now Silicon Valley. I'm part of those communities, right? We all have multiple communities that we are part of. We travel the world and we use that credit card, MasterCard and American Express, and we expect it to be honored wherever we go in. And they don't say, well, it only covers your geographic community from where you're from, right? We go to alma maters that are all over the world. We live in a global space. And so in Silicon Valley, a place that is helping to reshape the world, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, I think, has been at the vanguard of understanding we have people who care about the immediate geographical community, if you can find it on the map and name it, because we argue about who's in and who's out of Silicon Valley. But we also have people who are both from around the world and have interest around the world, and they want one-stop shopping in their philanthropic partner. They don't want to say, boy, when I'm working in India, I need to work with this group. When I'm working in Africa and all the countries there, I need another group. When I'm working at home, I need this, but when I'm working in New York, I need a different vehicle. They want one place that can say, we can manage just like that credit card. Wherever we go, you can help us figure that out. And so because of the demands of our individual donors and our corporate partners, we have been at the vanguard of saying, we've got to figure out these relationships. And as a result, we have developed capabilities that few other community foundations to this point have had to develop, but I think in the future they will develop, at least some of them.
One of the things, even though your foundation has been growing so fast, you do have limits, as everybody in this room does, and you've been pretty specific about the areas of grant making that the foundation is going to be in. And of course that meant saying no to some funds that you had given out before. You're not supporting every organization in the community. Can you talk about how you chose the areas that you focus in on, because they're pretty interesting in and of themselves, but also how you balance the idea that you had to say some groups just aren't going to count on getting the money from us anymore? Yeah.
Well, we're all grant makers in the room. So you are experts already at saying no. And I once received a letter from a bishop of a church who said, I've never been turned down so nicely, and I had to read it 3 times to understand that you'd actually said no. So we're very good at saying no. What I don't think we're as good at is in being transparent with people about why we've set the priorities we've set. We know why we've set the priorities. We're very clear internally what has driven a set of priorities. We don't have unlimited resources, so that means we have to make choices, but we're not always as clear about this is why we've made the choice, announcing that we've made a shift. These are the reasons for it. Take the hits that come with that, right? Because if you're no longer getting, you made the wrong choices. If you're now going to get, boy, are you smart. And that's just the game we play. Those are the rules in which we work. Where we fall down is in the accountability sometimes and the transparency of being upfront to say, this is what's necessitated to change. There's been a corporate shift. There's been a shift in priorities. We see different things evolving in the world that we think are important or in the local community. And then expressing the facts that support that shift, and then moving on. And I think when we have done that, it doesn't make everybody happy. Right? This isn't about people will suddenly go, boy, we get why we're no longer going to get funding. but people understand it. It's not then in this vacuum where rumors, people in the absence of information create their own narrative. And that is the most dangerous place to be, when people are creating their own narrative. That's when you put the brand, I think, at the most risk, as opposed to being upfront, creating tie-off grants, giving a transition period. And then people say, I don't really think it was the right decision, but they treated me fairly. I know the reasons for making the change.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the advocacy role that you've played, because that's a key part of that priority. And how does that jibe with your relationships with donors, with the corporations you work with? How does that all fit together?
Delicately. Look, advocacy for me is the heart of the transformational philanthropy, and it's some of what Kathleen was just talking about. It's what Kennedy was referring to. It's where we do our best work. But advocacy is about going after entrenched interests. It's changing the power dynamic. So I'll give you an example of where it's been touchy, but I think important. We have a number of companies that we work with that are in the banking industry. We have been very forthright about payday lending in low-income communities. We think is horrible, where payday lenders can charge upwards of 450% interest. And it's legal. It's legal to rip off people, okay? And some of those payday lenders, and it's getting worse because now they're on the internet, but some of those payday lenders are being financed by the traditional banking industry. And so it's a delicate dance that we walk to say we're helping some in the financial industry do their philanthropy. And at the same time, we're raising very tough questions where we're trying to get statewide legislation in California. We're working with the new Federal Consumers Bureau to say this has to stop. And our point of view is twofold. One, we do extensive homework before we go out on an issue. We know the facts better than anyone else, and we publish that research. Again, transparency. It's not done in a vacuum. So if we've got our facts wrong, people have more than enough opportunity to say, boy, you're not getting this quite right, or you're not understanding this component of it. And then we educate people as to why that is the ethical, moral stance if we want communities to be better. That it is an unsustainable practice to charge people who are at the margins those kinds of interest rates. That it's just not right. And it doesn't help the overall business practice to be associated with it. But it's delicate. It's challenging. But it's no less challenging that we work on issues around immigration. And we have individual donors who, one may say, fall on the conservative spectrum. And some of the things that we have supported that says, boy, if a mother is undocumented in California, she's going to clean somebody's home, she runs a stoplight, she shouldn't be deported and never see her kids again. We don't think that's good for California, which became California because we took it from Mexico. Ooh, I'm waking up a little bit. But that's the history, right? That's what's called San Francisco and San Jose. Those were Mexican names, right? So we balance that, but we balance it with educating the donors as to why we think it's not good for our community, why it's not good for our economy. So we take on those stances with a lot of research, then a lot of education, and a lot of transparency. We don't advocate on everything all the time, but we are selective and we try to be on point for why we do the work that we do.
One of the things that you've talked about is the work that you do internationally, and that is certainly a challenge to make sure that it's done well and right. And in some ways, some people might wonder, why is the Silicon Valley Community Foundation one of the biggest international grant makers. How did you develop the expertise to do it well? And what are some of the kinds of things that you think people in this room might benefit from that you learned along the way and probably are still learning?
Yeah, well, we've learned to do it with, as with everything, carefully. So we are today the 15th largest by dollar amount grant maker with Gates at the top. We're the 3rd largest by volume of grants. We do that with our corporate clients. We do it with our donors. We have developed the infrastructure to understand the Pension Protection Act, the Patriot Act. We just had some grants about a month ago. The president announced executive orders against the Ukraine. We had actually some grants in the process with one of our corporate partners. And we did the due diligence behind the scenes to understand that there were some relationships with those university officials to the Kremlin and individuals there. So we have the ability to go deep because for corporate clients, they are also worried about reputational risk of the individuals who are involved as partners. And we do that work with the corporations. We have a matching gift program with a partner named YourCause for employee matching gifts. We do that domestically and now internationally. We have a vetted international list of 700 NGOs. It'll be 1,000 by the end of this year. It'll grow exponentially after this year. And so we've got the scale. We work with over 150 companies from soup to nuts in our work with them. We have, in the case of HP, employees who go to their offices every day, have their badges, check in and help manage their employee giving programs, to one-off projects that we do with companies, to employee matching gifts, to international vetting. It's fun work.
I want to open it up to questions now. We'll come back to my posing questions to you, but I want to give the audience a chance because you've been listening to a lot of us all talk. And I wondered if there are some specific things that you want to hear about from Emmett, either about what he just talked about or other kinds of topics. Do we have microphones somewhere for people to? Good, in the back. Who wants to ask the first question?
And a question up here.
I want to hear about your collaborations with corporate foundations and some of the impact you're making geographically.
So collaboration with corporate foundations. Well, that's a lot of what we do. Let me pick one or two things very quickly. We just 2 weeks ago, May 6th, it seems like a lifetime ago, we had our first online giving day in Silicon Valley, a 24-hour giving day. We raised $8 million. 4,500 people participated in making an online gift. We had a number of corporate partners, Microsoft, Applied Materials, Walmart, Symantec, over 100 partners involved in that. It was a phenomenal day. We could not have done it without the partnerships that we had. We did it in honor of the 100th anniversary. We were very transparent and told people we're only doing it this year, and now there's a groundswell that we must do it again next year. So we may revisit that. We will revisit that. But that's one example of a very recent partnership that we have. We work with companies in doing all manner of things. So Microsoft and StubHub, for example, we placed their C-suite executives in nonprofit opportunities across the U.S. and around the world. We've done it placed people in New York. We've placed people in the U.K. and London. So we have, it really depends on what their needs are. We're very good at saying, you know, that's something we can't do, but if it's doable in Silicon Valley fashion, we believe we can figure it out. Is that, I mean, I can go on with other examples, but
Challenge grants and tackling a community issue that's collaborative.
you know, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Common Core. Sweeping the country. It's come to California as well. We are working, a lot of our corporate partners are highly engaged in education as a core area of focus. So we've got a working group of corporations, and I should recognize Maeve Micchio, who is our VP of Corporate Responsibility. Maeve, raise your hand. Raise it high. All right. So under Maeve's leadership, We've got, 12 or so corporations who are meeting regularly around that issue and saying, partnership is interesting because everybody wants to have their own piece that they can own, quite honestly. And I get that for the brand understanding. You want to be able to say, this is what we contributed and what we can measure. So what they're trying to do is map out the ecosystem of the pieces that need to be done and then owning that piece so that all of the pieces fit together. If you think about an automobile, you need the steering wheel, but you also need the brake and you need the accelerator. All the pieces are equally important to make the car go. Common Core is the car, it has the go, but we're trying to map out who's going to be the steering wheel, who's going to be so they can own their contribution to making the car go. And that takes time, but we're trying to manage that and be a part of that.
Is there another question?
Just
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Doug Saba with Visa. We're another payments company that
Yes.
you may have heard of and located in Silicon Valley.
Fantastic. I've got one in my wallet.
I know. We know our MasterCard and American Express friends very
Those
well.
two.
But we're down the road from you. We need a mention. The question is, there's a lot of focus. I mean, you have the word Silicon Valley and community in your name. There's a lot of focus on livability right now in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. There's a big growing anti-tech fervor, particularly up in the city. Can you talk a bit about what the Community Foundation and some of your corporate partners are doing around issues of livability, affordability?
Yeah, it is, and let me give some disclosure. I'm an economist by training, and I was new to California. And what do those two things have to do with one another? Being new to California 8 years now, surfers wait for the right wave. They don't create the wave. What we're experiencing in the Bay Area is a huge wave. It's an economic wave of prosperity, really. I mean, the companies are hiring like gangbusters. The housing prices go up. And I've argued what we have to do is understand two things out of the valley. One, rising tides do not lift all boats. We can universally say that. We are the proof point that just because you have a bang-up, booming, tremendous economy, that by itself will not change the conditions for people at the bottom, because we have some harsh conditions for people at the bottom. Second thing is we need intentional public policy. There are some things that companies and foundations, no matter how much they try, we are a drop in the bucket against a huge economic wave. And the things that we ultimately will have to address, it's going to be very difficult. Either we're going to have to go after zoning laws. That right now in a place like Palo Alto says you can't build over 6 or 7 stories. You've put a cap on it. So you can't build up at all, right? Look around. Look around. And yet at the epicenter of Silicon Valley, you can't build over 7 stories. We're on 10, I think, floor 10 here. So either you address zoning and or you address the sacred cow of open space. And those of you who've been in the Bay Area, it's beautiful, rolling hills. Beautiful, I love it. But you can't build on it. As long as the housing remains fixed, right? So in San Mateo and Santa Clara County last year, we had 17,000 new housing starts. We had 31,000 new residents come in. Companies and foundations can't by themselves address that mismatch. It's a public policy issue. And the dynamics that are happening, I think, that are counterproductive, particularly in San Francisco, and I should note, there is a San Francisco Foundation. Just like companies, there are overlapping community foundations. So we work there, but I want to acknowledge we have a colleague foundation. Protests against the corporate buses that you've seen. Those are people who chose to live in the community. They are taxed, they are residents, they want the quality of life there. You know, I lived in New York and I commuted from New Jersey. Can I imagine all of the buses and trains that go back and forth between New Jersey and Connecticut? People would be banging on the things saying, you shouldn't be here. It doesn't work because the bigger issue is a systemic problem that we got so many people who want to live there. And until we come up with systemic public policy solutions, we're not going to balance it out. And it doesn't happen when you vilify people because they want to live in a place and they happen to work at places that are successful. We ought to be celebrating that, but that alone doesn't help the people at the bottom. I can talk a long time on this, but I'm trying to be mindful.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit actually about the people who are on those buses and this way of the employees and what you're seeing in terms of the changing demands of employees these days about what companies should do, what opportunities they should have. What are some of the lessons you're seeing from some of the most innovative people in the country? What is it that employees are demanding and expecting of the people in this room?
Well, I think consistent with what the survey that was released and talked about yesterday indicated, CEOs and the companies are recognizing that the employees are their best talent, they're their internal customers. So how do we make these employees who are highly sought after, right? Highly sought after, sticky with our company? How do we meet their internal needs and desires to give back, to be at a company that they're proud of, right? That they feel good about, right? And so their employee engagement is at the top of what they're trying to do. And they're doing it in different ways. So in some very interesting ways. So you take, for example, VMware. VMware has said, you know, we want to encourage and democratize philanthropy for our employees. So we're going to give them resources on their certain anniversary dates. So like one is when they hit 12 years, they get $12,000. And they can give that $12,000 to any nonprofit that they want to. So the company has said, we're not trying to fit you into our categories of work. We want to give you the ability to go out and support whoever you'd like to support, whatever cause. Contrast that to the Yahoo Employee Foundation. To get a grant from the Yahoo Employee Foundation, one, it has to be championed by Yahoo employees. And those employees come together, they go get other employees, and they sort of do a campaign, and they say, here's why you should pick mine. And it's actually, they do it by crowdsourcing within the employees. Every employee to participate must give at least $1 or more to the employee foundation. So no matter what they get one vote, and then the employees who are part of the foundation vote on which of the nonprofits that the foundation will support. Again, a different engagement. If you look at SAP, they have a sabbatical program for high potentials, and they bring them together then for a short period of time to go work on community projects. So all of them are trying different ways to create and enhance employee engagement and experience consistent with their values about how to create that stickiness with their workforce.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the millennial demands. You have one of the most famous millennials gave to your foundation in a pretty big way, Mark Zuckerberg. But can you talk about some of the things that are different about them? The thing that struck me so much was that he didn't give to the Mark Zuckerberg Foundation. And I thought that was a pretty stunning thing. Is that a wave of something we're going to see more of in the philanthropic world? Absolutely.
I believe that you are witnessing what I believe is a third stage of philanthropy. Many of the people that I work with have looked at places like the Ford Foundation and the Gates Foundation and other places, and I worked at the Ford Foundation, full disclosure, and they've said, that's not the institution today that I want to help create. That's not the vehicle that I feel is the right vehicle for the future. And so they're looking at other vehicles. So if you look at Pyramid or Numidity or Network, it's not the traditional foundation. If you look at how Jeff Skoll has created his network of different entities, it's not the traditional foundation. Many of those Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, I'm pleased to say, are creating funds with our community foundations, and other entrepreneurs in New York and Texas are also creating funds with us. And why do they come to us? They say, we don't want the traditional cookie cutter institution. They want to be more engaged, they're more demanding, they're more outcome driven, and they are not risk averse. They're used to taking big risks. If you look at the things that they do, they're willing to take big risks, they're willing to fail, provided they learn something. I've never seen some of them so angry as when they spend a lot of money and they don't know what went wrong. They're okay spending a lot of money and learning something out of it. They hate when you can't say, well, what went wrong or what would you have done differently? And I think you will see over time, if you don't already, the companies that they lead are also starting to take bigger risks in their corporate philanthropy. And I think as they do that, that will create more space for many of you who may be at older or more traditional companies to be able to say, look over there at the risk they're taking. We aren't anywhere near the edge that you think we are, and it will create space for you to do more, for you to take bigger risks, and it will be okay. And I think that's a huge change that we're just at the start of.
I think another change we've seen is how President Obama has sort of become fundraiser in chief, bringing foundations and others together at the White House to talk about various initiatives. Science and math is getting a lot of money now, but also a really important initiative to help people, young men of color.
Yeah.
And I know you were engaged in that effort. Could you talk a little bit about just sort of what is this changing role of government and private organizations? It just seems different to me that all of a sudden we're having these White House things. He talked about it in the State of the Union. I don't usually hear foundations mentioned in the State of the Union.
No.
What's different now?
Well, I think what's different is our nation is in gridlock, to be honest with you. I'm glad that the president is acknowledging the foundation community and is looking to create public-private partnerships. That's a plus, right? And that's different. I want to be candid to say it's driven by the fact that we can't get any legislation through this country that says we want to spend money to do anything. And I think that all of us in this role, quite candidly, have a role to play in saying that doesn't serve our long-term interests. Just take something that should be non-political. Roads and bridges in this country. For those of you who are in transportation and those, we have bridges that are literally falling down. They've reached their life expectancy. They're just not any good anymore. They weren't built to last forever. They've reached the life expectancy of the bridge. And we can't agree on a construction package to rebuild the bridge. That's not some socially controversial thing. That's just fundamental. We can't get it through. And I'm not blaming any party, right? All of them are playing politics. That's what they do. But I'm simply saying it doesn't serve America well. So when you're the president and you see needs and issues, and you say, boy, one avenue is to try to get it through Congress, well, that's stop. That door doesn't work for whatever reasons you think. And I still want to handle some of these problems, then I have to become fundraiser in chief. I've got to go to people who have resources and then try to convince them to come together around the things that I'm saying. And quite frankly, we can't fund bridges and roads collectively. That's a government function. That's not what we do, and yet we're being drawn into doing basic services that really ultimately we have to say, wait a minute, and use some of our collective voices to say, that's a reasonable thing for government to do, and that if it costs X, we need to pay X. Right? And that's not to deal with there are other places where there's waste and there's fraud and there's abuse, but we ought to be able to get some things done for America. And he's forced into a role that's a good place to be, but he can't offer much to say, here's the match money, or here's what we can do, or here's the legislation that we can help to facilitate that. So they've arrived there at a time where I think the bigger problem is the gridlock and the reasons for the gridlock.
Absolutely. Let's take some more of your questions. What else is on your mind?
There's one over there.
There's one
Somebody
back there,
had a
I
hand
see
in the back.
too.
Yeah.
Let's go, we'll go back there first.
And I'll try to be quicker in my responses.
Hi, thank you. This is a great discussion. My name is Carrie Varakier, and I work for McKesson based in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of piggybacking on what my colleague Doug from Visa said, for those of you that have seen the show Silicon Valley, the joke is they all say we're changing the world through what we do. Philanthropy, CSR isn't mentioned. So can you talk a little bit about what you see from where you sit and, you know, what these CEOs are talking about?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think we are changing the world, and I think we're changing the world through the work that all of you do. It's some really incredible things. So let me start by saying, what's the definition of innovation? For me, innovation is about bringing new insight to old problems. It's not creating a new thing that's a small part. The real innovation is about new insights to old problems. So if I look at VMware, for example, and Compute to Cure, they recognize that we've got all of this data now. It's around cancer, if you haven't heard about it. And what they said is, look, we've got tons of data that across the country, scientists who are trying different cures for cancer and the mutation around the DNA that we aren't able to process. And so right now, we don't look at your particular DNA and try to match it to a particular drug. We just mass inject people. And if we could start to disaggregate the data, we might learn that certain drugs work better on certain kinds of DNA structures, and then more tailor the cure, the process of treatment to your particular DNA. That's huge. But it's a new insight that says we now have the processing ability to actually gather that data, sort it, create algorithms that can be useful, and interact with the researchers that way. So I do think that corporate philanthropy, people are looking at their unique skill sets and bringing those insights into persistent problems to say, wait a minute, we've got a team of people and they think about those things, and boy, they could do something on that topic. And that's the focus that you're starting to see more and more, I think, particularly in the companies that we work with, in bringing that innovation directly to the work that they do. I promised I'd be shorter, but I wasn't.
Who's the next question over there?
Hi, can you further elaborate on when you're talking about third wave of philanthropy, maybe give an example of where you're saying that these CEOs and others are more interested in being engaged and involved, but they have a higher risk tolerance. Can you maybe give an example of?
Yeah. So bear with me just a little bit, because one of the things that we give to all of our donors is confidentiality. So we work with a lot of people, but for obvious reasons that I know this room understands, when people know that they're working on something, then suddenly the company gets protested for work that they're doing as individuals. And so then they go, well, I need that anonymity, not because I'm afraid of the work, but because the company interest gets drawn in ways. But, you know, Mark Zuckerberg has been very public about his work around immigration. Right? He's been very public about his work in school reform. So the work in startup education in Newark, New Jersey, well, those are community foundation staff who are doing this work. And yet when it was announced on Oprah, you never heard Silicon Valley Community Foundation ever mentioned. Right? So he's taking big risks to try to transform, whatever you think about it, transform the educational process in New Jersey. And I guess there was the New Yorker magazine. Was the New Yorker or Atlantic? Was one
New
of
Yorker.
that's early. New Yorker magazine article. But, you know, public stance on immigration and whether you like that approach, whether you like the way the strategy was carried out. Again, really big public efforts to transform. And I would say others who are working through us are less willing to be public today, are equally doing really transformative things that I think are mind-blowing and will have a wonderful impact on the community. And they're bringing that piece to it. It is a renaissance in philanthropy today. And I think that renaissance ground center is Silicon Valley. When you think about the growth of those companies, the millionaires that are being minted on a monthly basis in the hundreds, and those people as they reach a point to sort of age out, there's this whole thing about aging out of the tech sector, there are going to be a lot of wealthy 30-somethings who have aged out. Think about it. Who will have 40 to 50 years to think about transforming the world in better ways. And that's what they want to do. They're signing up for the Gates-Buffett pledge and saying, I want to give it away before I die. I want to use this wealth not to hold it, not to create some dynasty in my family, but to make the world a better place. I think that's just amazing. And we spend a lot of time beating up these folk, and rather than celebrating their interest in that drive and that youthful exuberance of saying, boy, they really mean it. They're not just saying it. Kathleen talked about the importance of that public pledge that says, I'm going to do that work. So we hit 0.
And that was a perfect note.
And I hit it right on the mark. So.
There we go. That was well done. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.